Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Right Guys podcast. Oh my gosh, if you're a terrorist, we're going to deport you. That's just what we're going to do. And now your hosts, Josh Hammerling and Max McGuire.
Not only if you're a terrorist, if you are a terrorist sympathizer, supporter, encourager, protester,
college student,
yeah. Welcome back to the program. My name is Max McGuire here with Mr. Producer Josh Hammerling. This is kind of a long time coming. Trump administration said they were going to do this. They gave the student agitators who were basically, so here, let's take a step back. We all remember last year when they had the pro-Hamas, some call them protests. They didn't really they didn't become riots, but they definitely became lawless, right? Where they were taking over buildings, where they were damaging property, where they were threatening and intimidating other students on the basis of their religion and their ethnicity because they were Jewish. And it was a huge big deal, especially at Columbia University and other liberal arts schools. When Trump came in, not only did he shut that down and clarify that that kind of protest, deliberately targeting other students on the basis of their ethnicity and religion, is a violation of their rights, but clarified that if you are in this country on a student visa and you have no other claim to be in this country, participation in any protest activity or group that would undermine U.S. foreign policy would be unacceptable. Full stop. So what the Trump administration has been doing is they have been going through all the tape, all the evidence, finding the foreign students in the United States on student visas, F1 visas, who were participating, fomenting, organizing these protests and the like, and canceling their visas.
Remember when we were watching all those? It was essentially like some protests before the 10/7 attacks even occurred. Remember, there was the, we get that horrible thing takes place during the Biden administration. Israel's attacked by Hamas, and weren't there a bunch of protests that took place before that?
Oh, they've been protesting forever.
And then they had flyers out, right? Yeah. And then you see that at the college level, at least, some of these people were acting like propaganda mouthpieces at these institutions, right? And that's really something we don't like. I mean, you get sent back, you get deported for such things, right? So it's, I think it's kind of gross watching the pearl clutching from the Democrats on it too. How would you remove these people?
Oh yeah,
Max, how can we get rid of them? They were just protesting. They're just innocent people. They're at liberal colleges, and somehow they're getting caught up with terrorists, right? Oh, how could you?
Yeah. Every immigration visa has strings attached on what you can do and what you can't do. Now, the First Amendment protects people's right for freedom of expression, right? But that does not mean you're allowed to say whatever you want to say and still maintain your visa. They can't throw someone in prison for saying what they're going to say, but the State Department can revoke their visa and say, okay, you have the right to say this in your home country.
Mm-hmm.
We no longer want you here. And the statute that they're using is a relatively old one, but it's similar to the Trump can remove Alien Enemies Act, not as old as that one. But this statute says that if an alien's visa in the United States and their activities undermines U.S. foreign policy, it could be national security, but it can even just rise to the level of undermines U.S. foreign policy. The United States has the right to remove them. To say otherwise would mean that any foreigner can come to the United States, undermine American foreign policy, and we can't remove them. Right? I mean, it's just a common sense thing. So when you look at this one case of Romeza Ozturk, she is a PhD student. I believe she's a Fulbright from at Tufts University. Last year, let me see if I can share my screen real quick. Last year, she authored an op-ed demanding that the Tufts University president adopt new resolutions basically condemning Israel for the defensive war that they're waging against Hamas, calling it a genocide, saying the United States is complicit in genocide. Now, you have the right to say whatever you want to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's your right. But you don't have the right to say it here if you're here on a student visa. You're here on a student visa, you're supposed to be a student. Now, generally, people have the right to work a job and earn a living, right? Well, not on a student visa. You can't work in this country. That's illegal, right? Generally, people have the right to buy property. Generally not okay when you're on a student visa because you're not permanent, right? I mean,
No, you're here temporarily, right? You're going to school.
Yeah, you don't have the same rights. You just don't. And so when this woman, Ozturk, who's from Turkey, when she decided to set aside her studies and become an activist against Israel and against U.S. foreign policy, right? She basically failed to meet the requirements of her visa that she be here 100% for studies, right? That's what the visa says. You're going to come to the United States. It is 100% of your time is on your studies. Now, obviously, you can do recreation, right? You can sleep, you do other things, right? But you're here to study. If you get a job, you violate the terms. If you become a political activist, you violate the term, right?
Yeah. What would be the difference of her, it's like jumping over the border illegally and then getting hooked up with, terrorist sympathizers and starting to march to the street supporting them, right? It's no different. Except the reason you're here is for education. I wonder how many people had these student visas who somehow had connections to Hamas, right? Ended up being part of organizations, right? You just don't become a political activist like overnight in college.
Let me find the one.
I know it radicalizes people though, but does people just sit there and just realize, oh my God, this is a travesty. I've got to do something about it. I mean, I've never seen a lot of like transformation happen with people in college like that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's like they already show up here with an axe to grind before they go to school, right? So are they lying to us on the way in? I mean, are they trying to seed the universities?
Well, here's another example. A couple weeks ago, a week and a half ago, the Trump administration deported a woman. I want to make sure I get her name right. Dr. Rasha Alawi, Alawieh. Deported. She was a Brown University doctor. And the media was like, oh my God, they deported a doctor. That's going to put people's lives at risk. That's going to put everything back.
What kind of doctor?
Why would they ever deport a doctor? A doctor at Brown University. Here's the headline from CNN. Deported Brown University doctor acknowledged she attended Hezbollah leader's funeral on visit to Lebanon.
I mean, like, is the CIA watching this stuff, right? Yes. Is the State Department like, whoa. So she's at this dude's funeral, and then she like starts popping up on camera.
Not just this dude,
Israel stuff.
Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, right? A terrorist organization. When someone in the United States on a visa leaves the U.S. to attend a terrorist leader's funeral.
Red flags.
Huge red flags.
Flags everywhere.
And you don't have the right to have the benefit of the doubt, right? You're not a U.S. citizen. If you were a U.S. citizen and you did this, you say, oh, but yeah, I'm really interested in the Middle East. I'm really interested. I'm studying this. You could argue it. And at the end of the day, unless the government can prove you were committing a crime, you're a U.S. citizen, they have to let you back in. But when you are a visitor, when you're on a visa, and you travel abroad to attend a terrorist leader's funeral,
dude, like that,
you lose the right to come back and stay.
It's like wearing "I'm a terrorist" on my T-shirt, walking around school when you get back, right? I mean. So they deported her, right? I mean, she obviously got back in, and then they deport her, and then everybody's up in arms, like, oh my God, we can't have this lady kicked
Everyone's
out
up in
because she's
arms.
a doctor, even though she might have gone to like this really dangerous guy's
Yeah.
funeral. You just don't go to a terrorist funeral, right? I mean,
He is again. I don't want to like stress it. This isn't just some dangerous guy. This is the guy who has been calling the shots for every Hezbollah terrorist attack for
oh
the
my
last
god,
20, 30 years. This was an old man. He was very
wow,
old,
right?
right?
Like,
When I lived in Lebanon, when I lived in Beirut for a summer, I lived in Beirut, and when I was there, there was Ramadan. Ramadan's a floating holiday, so it shifts. I think it's like 11 to 15 days a year. So now Ramadan was this past month, but when I was there in 2011, it was in the summertime. And overnight, all of these Muslim prayer flags and stuff went up. Hezbollah flags went up, and Hassan Nasrallah portraits all went up in my neighborhood. I'm like, whoo, this is interesting. Yeah.
wow, yeah,
I lived in kind of south-ish, south central Beirut. And so that's Hezbollah, right? I was near the
Mhm.
Lebanese American University, so it was relatively safe, but it's still Hezbollah territory. And in Lebanon, Hezbollah, in addition to being one of the largest political parties, Hezbollah literally translates to party of God, right? Not only
I
are
didn't
they
know
one of the
that.
largest political parties, not only are they a terrorist organization, they're also the largest provider of like essential civil services. So you need your trash collected, you call Hezbollah, right? You need daycare for
Really?
your kids, you talk to Hezbollah, they find daycare, right? You need visiting nurse to help your aging grandmother, Hezbollah will help make it happen. That's why they are so loved in
Yeah,
Lebanon among the people, because in a country that has been plagued by war, has all of these ethno-religious conflicts, Hezbollah is like, okay, you're our people, and we're going to take care of you. That's how they've been able to hold on to power officially and unofficially. So this was a very powerful man.
yeah.
This is a man who snaps his fingers and things happen. You can't go to his funeral
No,
and
you're gonna end.
expect to stay in the United States when you're here conditionally.
You know,
Conditionally.
they watched every minute of that
Yes.
funeral from the
Yes.
CIA with satellites,
Yes.
plants, you name it, right? You just don't go to one of those and not end up on a
It was
terrorist watch
televised.
list.
It was televised. These were like open street
Yeah.
funerals. Like this wasn't like a
Wow.
private affair. This is like open public mourning. So a lot of these students are similar to the Alien Enemies Act. The people
Yeah.
are being removed there. They're challenging and they're demanding due process. But the problem is that while you look at this, say, oh yeah, due process, and we're going to watch the arrest video for this woman, not the one who went to the Nasrallah, but the other Tufts Fulbright student who was just detained.
Wow.
You have due process when it comes to being charged with crimes, right? So if the government can't just walk up to someone who's on a visa and saying you're guilty of a crime, we're throwing you in prison for the rest of your life. No, if they're going to charge you with a crime, they have to give you due process. But that's not what the Alien Enemies Act or this statute dealing with revoking visas does. It doesn't charge them with a crime. It exercises a core executive power to remove people from the country who pose a threat
Right.
to us, in our interests, right? So in the case of these students, they're not being charged with a crime. There is no due process here. When they applied and they signed on the dotted line for their F1 visas, they understood it was conditional. At any time, if they step out of line, the United States can revoke that permit. They don't have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law that she was at the funeral. All
Yeah.
they can say is that we believe she was at the funeral. And that's enough. You're gone. We're not taking the risk. Otherwise, you'd say, oh, well, you have to let the terrorist sympathizer funeral attendee live in the United States until you can prove it. No, of course not. Of course not. Of course not.
Well, that's the common sense approach, but then you've got judges everywhere who seem to be thinking that the law be damned. Everybody gets a due process as long as it gets their political beliefs over a finish line.
There is due process. There is due process. The due process is when you applied to come to this country on an F1 visa, you understood that your visa could be revoked at any time. It is conditional. It is subject to the determinations of the Secretary of State, full stop.
Mhm.
right? You don't get to go to court and argue with the Secretary of State that you're not actually posing a threat to U.S. foreign policy and U.S. interests abroad. You don't get to make that argument, and a judge doesn't get to decide whether you pose a threat or you don't pose a threat. It is completely subjective. It is completely determinative. The executive branch gets to determine it, right? And to look at the Alien Enemies Act, the craziness of this is this judge, is Boasberg, who, by the way, I believe he's also the judge who blocked Hillary Clinton's emails from being released before the 2016 election. Completely coincidental. Coincidental.
Wow.
What his order has said that Donald Trump cannot remove anyone who has been identified under his executive order. So basically, for the next 2 weeks or however many days are left in this TRO, the Venezuelan army, regulars in uniforms with tanks and other vehicles, could invade the southern border, and Donald Trump would not be able to repel them and remove them from the country until this judge's TRO, temporary restraining order, expires. He says you cannot remove Venezuelan invaders from the country. That is why this cannot stand, right? It is so open-ended, it's ridiculous. It would never happen because Trump would just say, F this, I'm not going to let Venezuela invade. Imagine like a Red Dawn situation.
Yeah.
Where you had the Russians, or in the new version, it was like the North Koreans. But let's look at the Patrick Swayze version. The Russians invade.
The right one.
The Russians invade. Mm-hmm. And Judge Boasberg says, oh, no, that's not an invasion. You can't kick them out. Like that. That's not a power that a district judge is allowed to exercise. Like,
then why are they trying?
Why? Because, Josh, for 4 years, these people weren't illegal alien invaders. They were migrants. They were asylum seekers. Seekers, right? So when you are conditioned to believe that these people are asylum seekers, they're undocumented, but they have papers, but they also don't, right? I mean, they want to have their cake and eat it too. These are just asylum seekers. They're just seeking a better life.
Bullshit. Right? They're invaders.
They are rejecting the very premise that these people could possibly have invaded the country, could possibly be doing harm to Americans and America itself, right? They are refusing to acknowledge it. And that is what really makes this so dangerous. It makes it so dangerous because this, and we're going to play the video in a little bit, this student, Oz Turk, this Fulbright PhD fellow, the minute she put pen to paper criticizing Israel, right? Criticizing the United States support for Israel. You know what Israel says? Israel looks at us, they're our ally. And whether you support Israel or don't, whatever, we have foreign policy interests. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. You could argue Lebanon, but it's basically Israel. Israel would ask, why are you giving visas to people who are in American universities condemning us? Like, why are you supporting that? Right? And whether we did it on purpose or not, it harms the relationship. So the statute that Marco Rubio used says just that. Anyone on a visa whose actions in the United States harm or threaten U.S. interests or U.S. foreign policy can be selectively, subjectively slated for removal and their visa revoked. Period. Full stop. There is no exception for some judge in Massachusetts or D.C. to say, oh, no, you have to let them stay and continue speaking out against America. There's no exception.
And yet they keep trying to cut one. And it's constant, man. Like, I know you've laid the case. They can't do this stuff, but they're doing it. So now does it turn into like one of those moments where Trump has to say, great, you're telling me this, enforce it. Because they can't. They can make these decisions, but they're unenforceable.
Yeah.
I mean, they're truly unenforceable but yet he's still staying he's allowing the stay to happen. I mean, this is the crazy part about Trump is he's being kind of patient here with what he can do.
He's being very patient. There are different degrees of visa and paperwork and permission to stay in the country. And the higher that gets, the more due process rights you're afforded because you have a greater right to stay in the country, right? So if you have a green card and you are a legal permanent resident and you are in the process of becoming a citizen, right? You cannot just be detained and flown out of the country without telling anyone. You can't, because you have a green card, you're a legal permanent resident. There are different things that have to, there's a process for revoking it, right?
Yeah, sure.
When you go through the process to become permanent, it is harder for the government to revoke it. When you are on an F1 visa, a temporary student visa, there is no appeal process. I mean, you can try, but there really isn't. There is no appeal process. The minute your behavior threatens U.S. interests, you're gone. Period. Right? And this idea that they can go before a court and the court can stop it and let them like challenge it, and that the judge can decide whether or not they should be removed. I'm sorry, if the judge wanted to have that power and to have that say, he or she shouldn't have joined the judiciary. He or she should have joined the Foreign Service and joined the State Department. If they're interested in making those kind of determinations, I'm sorry, they chose the wrong career path. But it was really funny. In Massachusetts, there's a judge who said, you must not remove this woman from Massachusetts. Think about that. The U.S. has identified a woman here on a visa and has revoked the visa and has ordered her deported. And a judge steps in and says, no, she's allowed to stay in Massachusetts.
Well, on what authority?
None.
Does he just get to throw the law out the window? Judges don't make law. They only call balls and strikes.
Yeah.
So
U.S. government said, sorry, she's already in Alabama. She's on her way out. She's in Alabama. She's gone. She's gone.
That's dumb crap, man. I mean, they're not supposed to be here. I want to go back to something like when they let people over the border. And no. Let's go back to the student visa thing. How many of these student visas now, if they're allowed to stay, can start claiming that they're escaping, danger or at least persecution in their own country, right? Or suddenly one becomes trans and they're allowed to stay. So can they just now? Like, okay, so you've deported me. I'm not here on my student visa. Well, I have to stay here now because I became trans at school. And if I go back to Lebanon, if I go back to any Middle Eastern country, they'll stone me to death.
Yes.
Is that all they'll have to do?
I go through this in my book, The Conservative's Guide to Winning Every Immigration Argument. There is a difference between kind of, you are removable because of a paperwork violation or because a visa expire or permit expire, right? There's a difference between that and you did something that warrants your active removal from the country. If you're here on a visa and you have a family and you're part of the PTO at your kid's school, right? You have more of a claim to fight your removal. You just do, right? But when you're just a student who's here a couple months of the year, like not even a whole year, right? You don't have that claim whatsoever.
Sure.
I want to play, before we run out of time, because this is going to be a shorter episode today. I want to play this clip of her being arrested. First glance, it looks bad. It looks like it kind of looks a little bit like she's being abducted. But the thing you need to know watching this is that the state of Massachusetts and the city of Boston have refused to in any way, shape, or form help the U.S. government with immigration enforcement efforts. They have refused to participate in it. They have refused to ride along to provide comfort and reassurance to people. They said, no, if you want someone removed from the country, you have to go find them and remove them themselves. We're not going to help you. So all of these removals, especially the ones in Massachusetts and other sanctuary cities, have to be done like this because they have no police help, no police escorts. Here's the clip.
This is okay, it's fine. I'm able to. Okay. Am I supposed to come? Okay.
So hard to hear it there. She says, "Can I call the cops?" And she said, and they say, "We're the police. We are law enforcement. You're being removed from the country." So you can see there that the cops remove their badges, pull them out, right?
I saw that, yeah.
And you see them right there on the screen. That one, this guy right there towards the top has it. The woman near the car has it pulled out, and then towards the bottom of the screen on the left, that guy has it. It's a little hard to see.
I saw badges come out, but man, that
Yep.
that looked kind of scary. Even if I was her, that would have terrified me. Like that.
Yes,
that's terrifying.
it
So
is.
let that. I mean, but that's what happens
Yeah.
when you have no support, and that's the
And
way it
that
has
is
to be
what
conducted.
happens. That is what happens when you have a city and a state that says if you're going to remove someone from the country, do it yourself. We're not helping you.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Do it yourself. Well, you need the element of surprise, so you can't
Yeah.
show up in a police cruiser, right? You have to have your badges tucked in. When you're worried about repercussions of who could be watching, you have to show up masked. You ever see terrorism officers like in Europe, how they all wear masks?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they are worried about reprisals. They are worried that if their identity leaked, them or their family will be threatened or attacked. So the only way they can do their jobs is by keeping their identity secret.
Well, but
That's
also,
what situation we're in here.
Yeah, and if you're the law enforcement, yeah, you have to worry about that now, because if this person does have ties to terrorism, are those people watching or with her now? Like, is she so important they're seeing this stuff happen? Are they trying
Well,
to?
she's just the one. This is just the one who wrote the op-ed. This isn't the one who visited the funeral.
Sure, but if you're with these people, right, and you continue to go after them, and they do end up having some of these terrorist ties, I mean, you don't want them to see your face. Right?
No,
I mean,
no.
and that's what we're facing in the U.S. now. Because once you let in a lot of these people who have ill intentions, right, you have to start thinking like the European law enforcement does, right? You have to protect yourself and your families. So we have to remember the lives of the law enforcement that are doing this job, right? I find them to be more important than the person here that's pinning stuff in op-eds talking about how there's big Satan, little Satan, right? Like it's got to go.
Listen, I remember when I lived in Lebanon, I had a lot. I'll tell a story. When I was in Lebanon, there was a guy who got really drunk one night and tried to attack me with a knife. Yeah, got drunk one night, tried to attack me with a knife. Tried to kick in my door and attack me. He had a visa to live in Lebanon. Like a visa to come back and forth whenever he wanted. He lived in Turkey. And we notified the authorities. This was like my second to last day in the country.
Oh my God.
We notified the authorities. Obviously, you notified the authorities. And this was someone who I was actually friendly with for most of my time there. And he just snapped one night. He got drunk. He was removed from the country.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't that he didn't have the right to, in his mind, he would say, "I was defending my honor," right? That probably would have flown in any other situation, other than the fact that he was threatening me and a couple other Americans.
Wow.
And Lebanon decided that it was in their best interest not to have a news story of Americans stabbed by Turkish visa holder, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So they deported him, even though he had some claim to keep coming into the country because his dad has business ties there. They deported him. They didn't just deport him, Josh. They deported him to Syria.
Oh,
and
dear God.
If you know anything about Syria in 2011, there was a civil war going on.
You would have avoided it.
Yeah, wow. There was a civil war. My trip to Syria that I had planned was canceled for that very reason. So I use that as an example of I'm not necessarily special, any more special than any other American who was living in Lebanon. But they were so fearful of the consequences of letting this go that they deported a visa holder to an active war zone.
Sends a message.
They drove him to the border and dropped him off. This is a power that every country on earth has. if you're in that country and you are behaving in a manner that disrupts that country, threatens that country's national security, threatens that country's diplomatic ties, you are removable. Period. Full stop.
Are we the only country that doesn't do it? I mean, according to some Democrats, that's the thinking.
Judges.
According to some liberal judges,
Yeah.
and I'm sure they've got the support of people in Congress. There's got to be half the people split down the aisle, split down the middle that are like, yeah, they've got to stay. We should be letting them stay. They have to be allowed. They have to be allowed to stay. Like,
let's read what the Democrats said about Ozturk.
Did they make a statement?
Democrats are spending more time defending Ozturk than they are defending Americans. Let me zoom in so we can read it.
Disgusting, really.
More than 30 Democrat lawmakers. More than 30 Democrat lawmakers are demanding answers from DHS and ICE after the latest high-profile arrest and detention of a foreign-born college student who had voiced support for the pro-Palestinian movement. In a Thursday letter to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and ICE Acting Director Todd Lyons, the 34 Democrats called for them to explain why Tufts University student Rameza Ozturk was arrested by 6 masked, plainclothes agents while walking home. Quote, the rationale for this arrest appears to be this student's expression of her political views. We are calling for full due process in this case and are seeking answers about this case and ICE's policy. Well, again, they are getting it wrong. If she was thrown in prison for having an opinion, that would be unconstitutional, illegal, not okay. The Constitution does not afford anyone in the U.S. on any visa to say anything while they're here. It does not. If you are here on a visa, you are allowed to say less than the average American would be allowed to say, right? Because your visa has strings attached.
You have to be on your best behavior.
They said that their arrest was disturbing and looked like a kidnapping. Surveillance footage of the arrest shows officers approach Ozturk in plain black clothing with no visible badges, and she can be heard screaming as an officer grabs her hands. Eventually, one officer pulls out his badge as others appear and cover their faces. Actually, there were 3 officers who pulled out their badges.
Yeah.
It was not 1, it was 3. They then load Ozturk into an unmarked vehicle before driving off.
Okay, so they didn't, pull out a bunch of canes and start beating her in the street, did they?
No.
Because in some of the countries where she's from, like if she went outside without a hijab, you get stoned, right? So let's stop the pro clutching on that. The cops were really, really calm. It's not like they were throwing her arms behind her. They didn't throw her on the ground. There was no knee on her chest or throat, right? None of that stuff happened. She was vertical the whole time. They identified who they were. And then I don't think she was thrown in a van. She was most likely put down as they covered their head. And, it just makes it feel like they're pulling people off the street and throwing them in vans.
All eyes were on her. All eyes were on them. They had security camera footage. They had another footage, which I don't even need to show because it's the same thing. But passersby were videotaping it. This was not the kind of thing where they were going to let it become a sensational media thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's best to just kind of end this by Marco Rubio was asked about this. Secretary of State. Secretary of State was asked about a single visa decision. And he had an answer. Here we remove that. Here we go.
Her visa. It's an F1 visa, I believe. We revoked it, and here's why. And I'll say it again. I said it everywhere. Let me be abundantly clear, okay? If you go apply for a visa right now, anywhere in the world, let me just send this message out. If you apply for a visa to enter the United States and be a student, and you tell us that the reason why you're coming to the United States is not just because you want to write op-eds, but because you want to participate in movements that are involved in doing things like vandalizing universities, harassing students, taking over buildings, creating a ruckus, we're not going to give you a visa. If you lie to us and get a visa and then enter the United States and with that visa participate in that sort of activity, we're going to take away your visa. And once you've lost your visa, you're no longer legally in the United States, and we have a right, like every country in the world has a right, to remove you from our country. So it's just that simple. I think it's crazy. I think it's stupid for any country in the world to welcome people into their country that are going to go to your universities as visitors. They're visitors. And say, I'm going to your universities to start a riot. I'm going to your universities to take over a library and harass people. I don't care what movement you're involved in. Why would any country in the world allow people to come and disrupt? Now, we gave you a visa to come and study. and get a degree, not to become a social activist that tears up our university campuses. And if we've given you a visa and then you decide to do that, we're going to take it away. I encourage every country to do that, by the way, because I think it's crazy to invite students into your country that are coming onto your campus and destabilizing it. We're just not going to have it. So,
bravo.
Common sense. Common sense.
Bravo. It made me really like Rubio in this role. Like, I'm like, here. You know, it's a solid cabinet, man. I like what he's picked here, and to hear his words on that.
Common sense.
Said it all. Said it all.
Just
said it all.
Just common sense. They have already either deported or detained or slated for removal over 300 foreign students who have engaged in this kind of behavior. These are not one-offs.
Wow.
There are hundreds of them. This is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end. This is the beginning of the beginning.
Yeah. Which is wild. And how fast they're
buckle up.
moving. Either they already knew they were there, or boy, are they the best intelligence gathering
Yeah.
body on the planet. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So stay tuned. Beginning of the beginning. More to come. That's it for this edition of the podcast. If you like it, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, like, comment, share. We're on YouTube, we're on Rumble, we're on X. We also have the audio edition of the podcast available everywhere audio podcasts are found. My name is Max McGuire.
I'm Josh Hammerling.
Remember, everyone, the fight to take back our country is not over yet, but the only way we win is if we all stand up and fight together. Next time.